From ZTN studios in Harare, Zimbabwe, welcome to the National Pulse. Our discussion today, emergency support from abroad. How is the government managing debt and foreign aid? This broadcast is brought to you by ZimPaper's TV network ZTN and our partners, the Zimbabwe Coalition on Debt and Development, ZIMCODD. Hello, I'm Andy Hodges. Now, the debt burden has for decades remained a recurrent and discordant note in the discourse on the crisis and contradictions of Africa's development. Available statistics indicate that between 1970 and 2002, Africa received a total of $540 billion in loans and paid back $550 billion, $10 billion more than the original loans over the same period. Yet still, after that, Africa owed $293 billion at the end of 2002. Not only do debt service payments consume a huge chunk of foreign exchange earnings, they also act to depress investment and lower the rate of economic growth due to debt overhang effect, leading to extreme poverty. As the crisis deepens, there's been heightened African struggle for debt cancellation from creditors, particularly from the Paris Club. This elite consortium of Western creditor countries that have made loans or have guaranteed export credits to developing nations. Looking at foreign aid, the question is, what is the actual relationship between foreign aid and economic growth and development? Before delving into that debate, it is useful to conceptualize foreign aid. Foreign aid takes diverse forms such as grants, loans, foreign direct investment, FDI, joint ventures, and technical assistance. Foreign aid basically encompasses all forms of assistance that a country derives from other governments or multilateral agencies and financial institutions to fill noticeable gaps, especially in production, savings, and investments. Now, joining us on the National Pulse today to discuss emergency support from abroad, how is the government managing debt and foreign aid, we're joined in the studio by Gani Mutazu, Senior Policy Analyst at the African Forum and Network on Debt and Development, AfroDad. And joining us during the show, we'll be speaking to Honourable Kindness Paradza, Member of Parliament for Makonde and Chairperson of the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Trade, and Dorothy Hove, Zimbabwe Women's Resource Centre and Network, ZRWCN, Co-Executive Director. Now, please, if you have any comments or views on our show today, please contact us via our Facebook page, ZimPaper's TV network, or via our Twitter handle at ZTN News. Thierry, welcome to the National Pulse.
Thank you very much.
Now, of course, the first question is what have been the impacts of the COVID-19 on debt levels in Sub-Saharan Africa and Zimbabwe in particular?
Okay, thank you very much. I think the simple question is, the simple answer to your question is that there have been huge impacts on the debt levels and also the ability of most of the sub-Saharan African countries to service the debts. As you are aware, before the COVID-19 pandemic outbreak, quite a number of African countries were already sliding into a debt crisis. I think from the IMF as of 2019, 19 countries were at high risk of debt high risk of getting into a debt crisis, and almost close to 8 countries were already in debt crisis or debt distress. And Zimbabwe is in that category of countries already in debt distress. You have your Sudan, you have your South Sudan, you have your Somalia.
Even South Africa, didn't they just get downgraded to junk status by Moody's?
Exactly. So quite a number of African countries were really in a situation of difficulty in terms of debt sustainability before the COVID outbreak. So when the outbreak came, you find out that the impacts that it has brought, economic impact, especially the economic impacts, have actually dealt a blow to the economic recovery of most of these countries. The World Bank, I think in this year, they are saying that the African countries, in terms of economic growth projection, as of 2019, they were like 2.4% in economic growth, but they are projecting that by this year, it will go down to minus 5.1%. And in any economic decline, I think debt is very much related to economic growth. If you have an economic decline, the ability of our countries to service their debts when they fall due becomes very limited. So we have the lockdowns in a number of African countries. Companies are being shut, mining sector down, the tourism sector down. And you know, this is where we get our forex to service the debts, especially the external debts. So if the economic activities are down, that means the ability of the countries to generate that much needed forex to then save the debt also is affected. Hence, most of the countries are now vulnerable to debt distress.
Now,
Yes.
I want to look at Zimbabwe. Now, last year, Afro-Dad organized the Zimbabwe Multi-Stakeholder Debt Conference, at the end of last year. At the conference, you stated, and I quote, this is Afro-Dad, you said, borrowing limits for government's borrowings were not fixed by the National Assembly resolution. The other issue is the failure by the Ministry of Finance to present to Parliament a report on loans raised and guarantees issued by the state and a comprehensive report on public debt. This is quoted from Afro-Dad. So I suppose the question then is bearing that statement in mind, do we have adequate legal and institutional provisions for managing debt and aid finance into Zimbabwe? And what are actually the best practices?
Yeah, sure. In terms of Zimbabwe, I think the work that we've done, especially the research work we've done in collaboration with ZIMCODD, shows that in place we have strong legal frameworks to govern the debt issue in Zimbabwe. We have the Constitution itself, especially the 2013 Constitution. We have the Public Finance Management Act. We have the Public Debt Management Act, the Reserve Bank Act. They are all in place. But as you are aware that there has been processes within Parliament to align some of the existing legal frameworks or the acts to the Constitution. I think that process has been very slow. And we have seen that there is need for alignment of the acts, especially the acts, the Public Finance Management Act and the Public Debt Management Act, to the Constitution, that is the 2013 Constitution. And we in the report that we produced, I think we are pushing the government to say that they should speed up the process, but they need to be aligned. You will see that there are a lot of leakages. When you read the Auditor General's reports, 2018, 2019, it speaks to the effect that there are a lot of breaches in terms of public finance management. That then shows that the provision within our acts or legal frameworks or the Constitution, somehow they are not being followed properly. So we need the alignment of the existing legal frameworks to the Constitution and also the findings from the Auditor General's reports. I think that needs to be taken.
But surely then, putting it very simply, if the government followed the legal provisions or the law, so to speak, then some of these issues should disappear. In other words, if the government does go and get foreign debt somewhere, they should bring it to Parliament for approval. They should scrutinize how it's spent, what it's spent on. But Afro-Dad seems to imply that seems to be lacking in the public finance management of Zimbabwe. Is that correct?
Yes, from our finding, that's true. I think not only in Zim, in quite a number of African countries, I think that's very worrying, because Parliament is a very important institution that plays a very important role, especially the oversight on public finance management. So it's a worry, and we have been engaging government in our advocacy work to ensure that Parliament is really capacitated so that they carry their constitutional function. So it's something that should be looked at and worked on, especially from the executive side. But also worrying in the case of Zim is that we have the Constitutional Amendment Bill number 2. If it passes, then that's going to take us back, because it's proposing to remove parliamentary approval of all loans or debts contracted by government. And I think it's very worrying. If it sails through, it means that Parliament will not be having that role of approving a loan before its funds are even disbursed.
Constitutional Amendment number 2, isn't it?
Yes, Constitutional Amendment Bill number 2.
Anyway, we're now joined on the National Purse. The discussion, of course, emergency support from abroad. How is the government managing debt and foreign aid? We're joined by Honourable Kindness Paradza, Member of Parliament from Makonde and Chairperson, the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Trade. Kindness, welcome to the National Purse. Hello, can you hear me?
Hello, I can hear you now.
All right, welcome to the National Purse.
Thank you. Thank you so much. What was your question?
Well, my question now, of course, is that, Kindness, what role does your committee play, if any, in monitoring, management and usage of debt and foreign aid? What sort of oversight role do you actually play?
Like what thank you so much. Like what my colleague has just said, there are a number of bills which are going to come to Parliament so that we deal with those issues you are referring to. Mm-hmm. But Section 327 of the Constitution is very clear on that the President can go and sign, or he can assign his ministers or whoever, a proxy, to sign on his behalf some protocol which brings in some fiscal obligation on Zimbabwe. And that agreement, it does not bind Zimbabwe until it is approved by Parliament. And also, I may as well tell you that we had the International Treaties Bill, which deals specifically with those issues. And we passed that in Parliament. It's awaiting presidential seal of approval right now. So we are going to deal with all those issues. So Parliament is very, very important. Government is not going to do anything, in other words, to bind Zimbabwe on anything without approval of Parliament. And not only that, because I know sometimes the finance minister will come for condonation. But we have been very hard on finance ministers in the previous parliament and this parliament to say, please get approval first before you come for condonation. So we are on that.
Right now, but one of the issues I think that Thierry here in the studio from Afrodad raised was that Constitutional Amendment number 2, which effectively looks like it will take away Parliament's oversight from any foreign debt or aid signed by the government. In other words, government doesn't have to come to Parliament for approval to sign that. Is that a correct statement? And do you agree with such a constitutional amendment taking away that kind of oversight from Parliament?
No, that is what the executive is thinking, and but it's going to come to Parliament for debate, and we are going to debate it as full Parliament and approve that with a 2/3 majority. So that issue we are going to deal with that. We cannot allow as Parliament to allow that the government can go and do whatever it wants without an oversight, because it's our role as Parliament to have an oversight on the executive. So really, it's their wish as the executive to bring that to Parliament, but we have our own views as well as Parliament, and because we are the people's representatives, so we need to have an open mind when we deal with such issues.
Now, one of the issues that's always come up whenever we talk about debt, foreign debt and aid, is the issue of leakages. So the question is, do we have adequate legal and institutional provisions for managing debt and aid finance in Zimbabwe? And what would you consider the best practice should be?
Let me tell you one thing. Zimbabwe, since 1980, we've been receiving aid, we've been getting loans and so forth. And we've been managing these very, very well. And there is I can't remember any day where it is said that we, as a government, has abused foreign aid or what. No, I haven't heard of that. And there are no instances of that. So we have structures in place. We have people who are qualified. We have the experience. So unfortunately, Zimbabwe is in a unique situation where, because of sanctions, we are no longer following the proper procedures from those creditors and so forth, or those who give us debt. So this has been our problem for the past 18 years. But we are happy that at least we are now talking to the we have restated that with the European Union. So we are dealing with that. But as I said, we have never had any situation in Zimbabwe here where foreign aid has been abused, because we have a strong civil society here, and we have checks and balances in Zimbabwe, and even within the government itself, there are strong checks and balances, and also those donors they follow up their monies. So everything, I think, is intact as we speak.
Okay. Now, many countries around the world have had their debts written off by multilateral lenders such as the World Bank, IMF and Paris Club. So, of course, why has this not been applied to Zimbabwe?
Let me tell you, what people forget, especially Zimbabweans, that they actually should be celebrating ourselves for clearing the IMF obligation. We don't owe IMF anything, unlike other African countries. A lot of African countries and all those in Europe, like Greece and so forth, they owe IMF millions and millions. But we've cleared with the IMF, so they should be celebrated to say, Zimbabwe, you've done very well. But it is because of this albatross within our necks, which is very heavy on us. So we cannot maneuver out of that. In other words, because of these sanctions, we cannot maneuver, and we need these sanctions, illegal sanctions, removed so that we are in line with other countries, so that even if we want to negotiate for debt relief, we must do it as a bloc. We must do it at continental level as AU. You know, the Secretary General of the UN has said remove sanctions on Zimbabwe, and also right now the African Union chairperson, President Ramaphosa, has said please scrap those illegal sanctions on Zimbabwe so that we are at par with other developing countries.
So are you actually saying then that the debt forgiveness is really linked to sanctions, not perceived by Western donors but by the fact of mismanagement of money? You think it's about sanctions all about it? That's why we haven't been given debt relief?
Yes, of course, because the people who have sanctioned us are the very people with the money. we are indebted to those people as well through the way they control the Bretton Woods institutions, IMF, World Bank, and so forth. So it's the same people that are judges, they are the prosecutors, and so forth. And it becomes very difficult for us because we are also there's a red line on Zimbabwe to say, hey, yes, Zimbabwe, what can we do with it? You remember Minister Mtuli, he wrote a very passionate letter to all these financial institutions to say, can you please help us because we are under siege because of this COVID. But you see, and we are happy that at least the World Bank has released 7 million, and others are going to do the same. But let me tell you one thing: this money which is coming to us is not coming via government channels, properly government channels. It's coming via CSOs or other donor agents, NGOs, and so forth. So it's difficult for us to trace this money. This money, they announced to say we've given Zimbabwe 43 million. We've given Zimbabwe so much million. But this money is not coming directly into treasury. This money is going via elsewhere, other avenues. And these avenues, they take also this money. The intended beneficiaries, they don't get all this money. You know, civil society in this country is big business. So they take a large chunk of this money and they put it as administration fee. So it becomes a problem with us.
Now, the Permanent Secretary of Ministry of Finance, George Givamatanga, actually said, and he wrote a memo to government ministries stating that a lot of senior government members were taking funds for allowances and benefits rather than giving the money to the intended beneficiaries. And that's a public record. I mean, that surely we need every penny we can get from any debt or aid given to us. What would be your comments to that?
Yes, I agree with that. He was right, because I know it happened in the Ministry of Health, where the Global Fund, which was meant for HIV, those people living with HIV and so forth, the money was supposed to go to the beneficiaries, and the money was supposed to go to the frontliners, those on the front lines, the health workers and so forth. But it happened that some people there, the senior people there, were also benefiting from this money. The same thing I'm talking about. Even this money which comes through civil society, is also the large chunk of it is also taken as administration fee. So the loopholes are also there, even in government and elsewhere as well.
Okay. Now, your committee, of course, you're the chairperson of the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Trade. Now, Zimbabwe has been on a re-engagement campaign with the rest of the world in an effort to normalize relationships. So can you just give us an update on what has been the outcome of this campaign in light of you chairing the committee?
Yes, we've been doing very well, and it was working very well before COVID. And we went to Sweden. We are dealing with all the European countries, and we are doing with the US. We are dealing with the British, and we were supposed to go to UK to meet our counterparts there. We're supposed to go to Congress to meet with they're waiting for us there to meet, so that they hear from us as Parliament. Because all along they've been hearing from individuals or other political parties. They've not been engaging us as Parliament. Because when they talk of law reforms, we are the people who are doing those law reforms as Parliament. And we have done a lot in terms of law reform. I know a lot needs to be done, yes. We are talking of realigning most of these laws to the Constitution, and we are doing exactly that. But we have done a great deal. We have done MOPA. We've done right now Freedom of Information bill, which is going to take away IPA. And we are doing Media Commission bill. So these are some of the positives which we are doing. And this is what we have been telling our colleagues as we do this engagement. And we have been received very well. And the government is is also doing the same thing. Because as Parliament, we complement what the government is doing in terms of re-engagement. So we've been doing very well. And also, in terms of because there are issues about governance, about rule of law, it's about corruption and so forth. So we've been telling them that all this, you need to be patient with Zimbabwe because this new administration has just been there for the past 2 years. All these other issues you are talking about are historical factors which need to be realigned, which need to be sorted out, but give us time. This has been our message. But the problem is that we have the international community, which is very, very impatient.
Okay. Now, your committee also looks at international trade, and during the period of the lockdown, trade worldwide has been significantly reduced. So what are the plans to restore our trade to pre-lockdown levels post-COVID-19? Because that will be significant in getting our economy moving.
Yes, I agree with you. But let me tell you one thing. No one knows when this COVID is going to end. But I think I think it's a long haul. But however, this is actually the opportunity for SADC to have regional integration as SADC, so that we remove all these other barriers after COVID, so that we'll be able now to interact and trade among ourselves, remove the tariffs and so forth, which have been creating all these problems. And also at the Africa level, let's make sure that we operationalize this Africa Continental Free Trade Area, so that as we after COVID, we trade among ourselves as Africans. Let me tell you one thing in Zimbabwe today. We didn't know that our universities, our tertiary institutions are able to manufacture masks, are able to manufacture sanitizers. But they're able to do that right now. So this is what we need. We have the people with capacity to do it in Zimbabwe here, within the region and at Africa level. So what we must do after this COVID is to make sure that we have an inventory to say, we look inward to say, what can we do as Africa? What can we do as SADC to make sure that we don't rely on Europe, we don't rely on foreigners?
Now, my guest in studio from AfroDad, they held a conference last year, Zimbabwe Multi-Stakeholder Debt Conference. And one of the issues they raised was that the failure by the Ministry of Finance to present to Parliament a report on loans raised and guarantees issued by the state and a comprehensive report on public debt. So, of course, that brings us to the question is that what really should Parliament in particular do to hold the executive to account if they don't bring those timely and before they actually spend the money or get the money?
I agree with you. Remember, it is this Parliament, we say, when Madam Chari, the Auditor General, was about to be removed, we said no, we refused. We said we want her back, and she's back. It's because as Parliament, we want government to be accountable. Every cent which we give through the budget, we know it must be accounted for, and we follow that up as Parliament. And we don't want, as I told you, we don't want the minister to come to us. He spends there the money there, then comes to us for condonation. We've said no, we don't want that anymore, and we are going to change that in these bills which are coming to say no, we don't want that to happen. You must, if you want to spend money on anything, you must come to Parliament first to get approval. So we are on that because the government will agree with AfroDad. The government must be accountable. We must, as Parliament, we must have a serious oversight to make sure that the government does not go off guard.
Now, is Parliament going to ensure that any foreign aid, any aid received is transparently reported, not just to Parliament, but also to the citizens of Zimbabwe, so that we all know who we got it from, how it was spent, the people that it was spent on, so we even want to know the companies that the money was given to? Is Parliament going to push for such a thing?
Yes, and we pushed that, if you recall, we pushed that during the Cyclone Idai. And the Minister Moyo, July Moyo, had to come to Parliament to give a ministerial statement and also a list of donors to say who has donated money and where has the money gone to. So we are going to demand that everyone who donates, it must be accounted for, and the nation must know, and also Parliament, because we're the people's representatives, we must know. So government, actually, according to the Constitution, government is accountable to Parliament. The executive is accountable to Parliament for your own information when it comes to the issue of money.
Honourable Kindness Paradza, Chairperson, Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Trade. Thank you very much, sir, for appearing on the National Pulse.
Thank you so much.
Well, Thierry, you heard what Honourable Paradza there had to say, and there was a lot to unpack, interestingly enough. But two things I'd like to just pick up on. The first one, of course, is he was adamant that the executive may want Constitutional Amendment number 2, which takes out the oversight of Parliament over foreign debt with certain institutions. However, that's the executive, and it still has to come to Parliament and be debated. And the second point I'd like to raise is that he says that he believes that never before, he denies that there's ever been abuse of aid or debt financing that's come into Zimbabwe. Would you have any comments around those 2 points?
Okay, thank you very much. It's true that this is to a bill that is supposed to come to Parliament for approval. I'm aware that with ZIMCODD, as part of the civil society groups, we have been having meetings and consultation discussing the bill as it is now. And we have raised a lot of concerns. We welcome the MP's promise that they will fight whenever it comes to Parliament. Yes, yeah, that's what he's promised. That when it comes to Parliament, they'll try to fight that. I think it's important they do that because once parliamentary approval is removed from contracting debts, especially external debts, that's a recipe for disaster. Because debts that are not productively used, in the end, they become unsustainable. So we will fight with him when it comes to Parliament to make sure that
that he follows what he's just said.
It doesn't pass through. Yes. In terms of the usage of foreign aid and debt, I think the Honourable is quite familiar with the Auditor General's reports, which really brought a lot of leakages, physical leakages, in terms of how the government, even central government, provincial government, and local government are managing public funds. And I think there are a lot of issues in those reports. And we would love to see maybe his committee and another committee taking the recommendation from those reports and make sure that any breaches of the provisions that are in the Public Finance Management Act, the Public Debt Act, people are brought to book, so to speak. And they must be, those leakages, the holes must be plugged.
But there's another problem though, and the question is why should we wait for these reports before we take action? Because you see the Auditor General's report is for 2018, sometimes 2017, 2018, 2019, and we're waiting for the report to be issued. Before then people say, well, hang on, this money was taken, it wasn't taken. Surely there must be steps prior to the report that needs to be done to ensure that such leakages don't happen.
Very correct, very correct. But I think it is the role of our members of Parliament in their various committees, especially those that deal with public finance issues, to make sure that they have an eye on it. I think as civil society organization, we are limited in some way in terms of how we monitor public funds in our government. So I would love to work with the parliamentarians to ensure that not only should they wait for these reports when they are published, but also they should be proactive. And maybe the way they work, they should find better ways of always being ahead of some of these things.
Exactly, ahead of the curve. Now, very quickly, because we have to take a breather, but for this section, my final question is, what is your assessment of the debt suspension initiatives announced by the G20 and IMF?
I think from civil society organization at the global level and even at the regional level, that's Sub-Saharan Africa, and nationally, we welcomed the debt relief measures, especially taken by the IMF and the G20. But what they simply did was to suspend debt service payments falling due this year. So a number of, I think close to 25 African countries have benefited from that. I think it's going to be, the suspension is for 6 months. So the amount of money or funds that were supposed to go to debt servicing, member countries can now use them to fight COVID-19. It's unfortunate that ZIM is not part of those countries because of the obvious reasons. I think the Honourable MP raised sanctions as one of them, but also because the government owes the World Bank and the African Development Bank in terms of the arrears. So until they clear those arrears, I think they...
I mean, that's the bottom line, isn't it? It's about clearing arrears. Because the Paris Club has forgiven some African countries. I think Somalia is a good example where they forgave the debt. Rather than delay the payments of it, they forgave it entirely. So the fact is that some of these multilateral lenders are really wiping out debt of countries.
Yes, that's correct.
All right. Well, unfortunately, we're going to have to take a breather because we're getting really into the discussion now. You're watching The National Purse. Our discussion today, emergency support from abroad. How is government managing debt and foreign aid? This broadcast is brought to you by ZimPaper's TV network, ZTN, and our partners, the Zimbabwe Coalition on Debt and Development, ZIMCODD. In our final segment, we will be joined by Dorothy Hove, Zimbabwe Women's Resource Center and Network, that's ZRWCN Co-Executive Director. Don't go away. National Purse will be right back. Welcome back. This is The National Purse. Our discussion today, emergency support from abroad. How is government managing debt and foreign aid? This broadcast is brought to you by ZimPaper's TV network, ZTN, and our partners, the Zimbabwe Coalition on Debt and Development, ZIMCODD. Now, please keep your comments and views coming via our Facebook page, ZimPaper's TV network, and our Twitter handle @ZTN News. We really would like to hear from you. Now, Thierry, Afrodad's mission is to contribute to Africa's inclusive economic growth and sustainable development through influencing policy change on debt management and development finance anchored on a rights-based approach. So what specific policy changes would Afrodad recommend to the government?
Yeah, we work on 3 thematic areas from Afrodad's side, which is the debt management. We also have what we call domestic resource mobilization portfolio and international public finance portfolio. So these 3 focus areas are key in whatever policy advice or recommendation we give to governments. For example, on the debt issue, you know the history of the African countries in terms of the debt. I think in the 1990s, coming to 2000, a lot of African countries were in debt, especially the multilateral debt. And the causes of that debt then was really both external and internal. So since the World Bank and the IMF canceled the debts of the 1990s and coming to 2000 of a number of African countries, we have been working or advocating or recommending to our African government that they need to institute prudent public debt management policies. What do we mean by that? I think some of the reasons that we saw as the causes of the previous debt crisis were issues to do with lack of prudent borrowing. Why are countries borrowing? And the usage of those funds once they are also borrowed. So in our new advocacy work with Afrodad, especially with those countries that benefited from the debt relief initiative of the World Bank, that's the HIPIC and the MDRI, we've been pushing for prudent debt management, setting up of institutions that are supposed to be responsible for managing debts, especially the external debt, because that's the risk part of the debt if you had compared to domestic debt. So we've been pushing government to put in place institutions that will manage these debts. We've been pushing government to borrow for productive reasons, for projects that will bring returns when the debt falls due in terms of maturity. We've also been pushing for the role of the parliament. I think the Honorable MP spoke very well that they need to play a very important role in oversight, especially on public finance. The other portfolio we work on is to do with, besides debt, what should our governments do to raise resources domestically? So we have taxation issues, we have institutions that are supposed to do that. In the case of Zimra, they should be capacitated so that they can collect as much tax as possible. Because we can only develop using your own domestic resources. Debt is there to supplement. But if badly managed, it can really be a bad issue.
Please keep your thoughts, because joining us now on the National Purse, emergency support from abroad, how is the government managing debt and foreign aid, is Dorothy Hove, Zimbabwe Women's Resource Center and Network, ZRWCN Co-Executive Director. Dorothy, welcome to the National Purse.
Thank you. Good afternoon to you all.
Good afternoon. Now, the Zimbabwe Women's Resource Center and Network, ZWRCN, is a non-governmental organization committed to promoting women's social and economic justice in Zimbabwe and globally through the power of information, networking, and strategic advocacy. So how, during this pandemic, are you fulfilling your mandate?
What we've done so far is to ensure that the communities that we are serving are fully equipped with information around what COVID-19 is really about, because there have been a number of myths and facts around what COVID-19 is all about. So what we've done is to come up with information that is shared across all the communities that we have presence in, so that they have an appreciation and understanding. And what we've further done is to continuously engage them in terms of how they are faring as communities, as women during this pandemic, and tying it to the current discussion around debt relief. For us, our major concern is around the surplus, the budget allocations, funds that are being allocated towards COVID-19. You would like to appreciate that there has been a number of donations and commitments that have come through from development partners. So our interest is basically to have an appreciation and understanding how those resources are being allocated towards the fulfillment of PPE requirements, fulfillment of having ventilators in place, and actually ensuring that our women are still able to access sexual reproductive health rights services during this pandemic, irregardless of us having the current COVID-19 pandemic.
In fact, that takes me exactly to my next question. I mean, do you believe that the government should utilize some of the funds to advance and promote women's rights and empowerment?
Most definitely, because you'd find that if you look at Zimbabwe, we are highly informalized. And us being highly informalized, you'd find that a certain percentage, almost 60%, is composed of women who are the backbone of the economy. And you'd find that they are the most who do cross-boarding. And with our borders closed at the present moment, it means that their sources of livelihood have been compromised. So then what we are trying to push for is a recognition from the government that the women generally are not able to sustain their families before COVID-19. So it is very important for government to deliberately make allocations for the vulnerable groups. We appreciate that the food parcel, there's the allocation, I think it's the 200 RTGS that is supposed to be going to communities and to people. But what we are saying is 200 RTG is not adequate to sustain a household. If you go into a supermarket, you would find that prices are very, very exorbitantly high. And an ordinary woman who is staying in a rural community, who is staying in a high density suburb, $200 is not adequate to sustain the family for a period of a month. Yes.
Well, we did a show last week, a National Purse, obviously our partner with ZIMCODD as well. And one of the issues that came up was how to get this money. You can say that you're giving $200 per head in each family, but then you may have some women in particular may not have mobile money payments, they may not have bank accounts. So as a result, how do you physically get them the money to actually help benefit them?
So you'd find that as an organization, we're also part of the Women's Coalition. And what we've been trying to do as part of the coalition through the Secretariat is to have constant engagement with social services to ensure that those women, those children, the elderly are reached. And what we are saying is would want them to get it as hard cash if it's possible, because the mobile and the electronic resources, they attract a 2% charge. So you'd find 200 already being charged 2%. And then there is also that tax that is charged when you purchase goods on top of the 2%.
Yes.
The VAT, yes. So you'd find that at the end of the day, the funds that the communities are being given are still not adequate. So we are having conversations to say, can we at least have a reconsideration, seeing that we are now in the second month of COVID-19, and COVID-19 is here to stay. So we would want to see sustainable resource allocation that has the community, the marginalized people at heart. That is so. That's really what you now. Yeah. Now, you find that this is affecting the whole precautionary messages around social distancing. You'd find that we have long queues.
Now, long queues. Yeah. Now, yes. Finally, unfortunately, we have to leave you. But what policy initiatives should the government enact to ensure that there is proper gender budgeting and also to mainstream gender in local and national governance policies, programs, and budgets to achieve good economic governance?
For us, the major policy document is the national budget. The national budget should be adequately resourced to ensure that the marginalized groups are targeted and they are able to receive, to be prioritized and to receive what is duly necessary for them. So you'd find that national budget has the social welfare component. So that component should be adequately resourced. And when the portfolio committee is playing its oversight role, they need to ensure that sectors like health, sectors like the social services, sectors like education, they are well adequately resourced to ensure that when we have a national crisis, we are able to tap into those budget lines and be able to immediately respond to the crisis, because the lack of prioritization and gender-sensitive budgetary allocations is leading us to where we are now. And what we would want to see is the government investing more in domestic resourcing, as the previous speakers have mentioned. Issues to do with taxation, issues to do with manufacturing. We need to look at our sectors such as manufacturing, mining, agriculture, so that we do not have to constantly borrow. So the fact that we are constantly borrowing is leaving us in a dire situation where our own national policy and our national budget is not adequate to sustain the country and resource for the marginalized communities.
Dorothy Hodges, Zimbabwe Women's Resource Center and Network, ZRWCN Co-Executive Director. Thank you very much for participating on the National Pulse.
Thank you.
Now, interesting comments there, particularly about the gender budgeting part. But I want to get back to the fiscal management side. Now, Afro-Dad has said that Zimbabwe still has options at its disposal to manage its debt, such as fiscal discipline, regular debt audits, adherence to legal debt management provisions, and, of course, implementation of punitive and deterrent measures, among other things. To what extent is Zimbabwe actually implementing these measures or these suggestions?
I can say to some extent they are trying, as we are aware that there have been quite a number of debt relief measures from the government, especially the Ministry of Finance. I think the last plan they came up with was to do with what they call the Lima plan. And I know there are a lot of proposals within the ministry where they are trying to clear the arrears. I think once they clear the arrears from the World Bank and the African Development Bank, things might start moving. But I think the challenge is maybe because of the sanctions or the inability of the economy to generate enough resources to clear those arrears is a key issue here. If you remember, I think a few months back, as I said, one of the countries also in a debt distress is Somalia. But I think a few months back, Somalia managed to get a debt relief from it. But they were given what they call a bridge loan from the Norwegians, where they used the loan to clear the arrears. And after that, then they kick-started the discussion in terms of debt restructuring with the Paris Club, with the IMF and the World Bank. And for Zim, I think somehow that's the way to go. But maybe because of the politics, that has been delaying for quite some time. But regardless of that, I think what is important is for the government to manage the economy well so that it generates enough resources to help it clear the arrears. And also to plug the leakages. As I said, when you read the Auditor General's report, it gives you an impression that there is fiscal indiscipline within the financial, in terms of financial management of the country. So, and also its relations. It's good that the Honorable MP says that they are re-engaging their discussion with quite a number of international bilateral, multilateral players, so that we might get help to do that. So if that comes on board, I think we will see a movement in terms of debt restructuring. Because already, as you said, you see that the IMF this year, they are quoting like close to 10.6 billion as of now of external debt. And almost half of that, 6 billion, is made up of arrears. And that's very worrying. So we need really to engage properly, politically, economically, and also in terms of our relations with
we need to manage our debt.
Yes.
Unfortunately, we've come to the end of our show, but I'd like to thank our panelists, Tirivangani Mutazu from the African Forum and Network on Debt and Development, AfroDAD, Honourable Kindness Paradza, Member of Parliament for Makonde and Chairperson of the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Trade, and Dorothy Hove, Zimbabwe Women's Resource Centre and Network, ZRWCN, Co-Executive Director. Thank you very much for appearing on National Pulse. Now, you've been watching the National Pulse, emergency support from abroad. How is the government managing debt and foreign aid? This is live from ZTN Studios in Harare, Zimbabwe. This broadcast is brought to you by Zimpaper's TV network, ZTN, and our partners, the Zimbabwe Coalition on Debt and Development, ZIMCODD. Now, please, if you have any comments or views on our show today, please contact us via our Facebook page, Zimpaper's TV network, or via our Twitter handle, @ZTN News. Now, a final comment. According to the 2019 budget statement, Zimbabwe's total public debt stood at $17.69 billion as at the end of September 2018, while the 2019 budget statement stated that external debt was valued at $7.7 billion and domestic debt was $9.6 billion. It is clear that some of the economic issues the country is grappling with stem from this debt overhang. Of the country's debt, only 25% represents the principal amount, while 75% is an accumulation of arrears and interest owing to Zimbabwe's inability to settle its external debts in the past 2 decades. Zimbabwe is currently in debt distress, with public and publicly guaranteed debt at unsustainable levels of around 97% of GDP, against a statutory provision of 70%. External debts are owed to multilateral institutions such as the World Bank, African Development Bank, and the European Investment Bank, in total about $2.6 billion, and bilateral creditors $4.7 billion. Now, Section 298 of the National Constitution is clear and sets out principles guiding all aspects of public finance management in Zimbabwe. Public borrowing and all transactions involving the national debt must be carried out transparently and in the best interest of Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe, like any other country, needs to effectively manage its debt and foreign aid. Otherwise, future generations of Zimbabweans will pay the price. I'm Andy Hodges. Goodbye, and you all be safe.